So I stopped doing the podcast a couple weeks ago, focusing on different topics and everything like that. But I got a lot of people that reached out and they're like, "Man, it sucks you're not doing the podcast anymore." Got a lot of good information, good insight. So what I'm going to try to do each week is commit to making like a 5 or 10 minute video each week. Maybe a chance for me to share some insights, rant about some stuff, get mad. I don't know, across the board, but really helping you grow as a practitioner in your own mindset, all that stuff. So, what I want to share this week is the idea of the blame bias. Blame biases are really, really messed up, can cause a lot of problems. I want to share that with you this week. My favorite book, I got bad glare in here, of all time. Probably read it like 20 times. The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. If you haven't read that yet, I would definitely check it out. It is an amazing book. Really just helps you deal with people, how they are, helps you understand why you do the things you do. Because at the end of the day, we are a very advanced society, but we have primitive brains and that can mess up a lot. So I wanted to share in the chapter on irrationality, and I'm going to read it really quick. It should only take me about 30 seconds or so. The idea of what's called the blame bias. So the blame bias, I learned from my experience and mistakes. Mistakes and failures elicit the need to explain. We want to learn the lesson and not repeat the experience. But in truth, we do not look too closely at what we did. Our introspection is limited. Our natural response is to blame others, circumstances, or momentary lapse of judgment. The reason for this bias is that it's often too painful to look at our mistakes. We go through the motions, pretending to reflect on what we did, but with the passage of time, the pleasure principle rises and we forget what small part in the mistake we ascribe to ourselves. Desire and emotion will blind us yet again, and we will repeat exactly the same mistake and go through the same mild recriminating process, followed by forgetfulness until we die. If people truly learn from their experience, we would find few mistakes in the world and career paths that ascend ever upward. Good stuff right there. So, the blame bias. I want you to think about this just not only for your clients and your patients that come in, but for yourself. And there's like three layers of the blame bias, and a lot of this is formed in like victimhood and not taking personal responsibility. So, the first layer of bias is you blame circumstances. We see a lot of this going on right now. I just read an article where they're like, well, 95% of obesity is fully linked just to genetics. Like if your parents are fat, you're going to be fat. And that's just what's going to happen. Nothing you can do about that. You see that with clients all the time. They'll be like, well, I have a bad back because my dad had a bad back. My mom had a bad back. They blame their circumstances and then doesn't require them to take any real responsibility of what's going on. They blame everything else across the board. Next problem is they blame others. They might blame their spouse. They might blame their kids. They might blame their boss for reasons why they can't get any better or why they're in pain or why they can't come in for treatment. Who knows? And they might also blame you as a practitioner. You ever had that person that comes in and they're like, oh, I don't know what you did to me, but you made my problem worse. And I'm like, oh, okay. I had someone like that a few weeks ago. They're, old, overweight, out of shape, don't move for shit. But they come in and they're like, well, what'd you do to me? I'm like, I didn't do shit to you. I didn't put shit down your throat for years, not have you exercise, not take care of yourself. But people want to do that. They want to blame other people and they want to blame you as a practitioner. So this happens a lot from your view, from being like how your clients act when they act ridiculous and they're just being, I get what's the word I'm thinking of? They're just being unrealistic about what's going on. They want to blame the circumstances. They want to blame other people. Now, you might do this yourself. And that's a big idea behind the book and the laws of human nature is like doing some introspection about like, what am I doing? The first time I read the book, I went through it and I was like, oh, this person's like this and this person's like this. When I started reading it multiple times, I came back through and I was like, holy shit, this is how I am. This is where I mess up. And we tend to do this a lot. And when you blame circumstances, you blame other people, what you do is you just give your power away. And your power, people think power is like this big, strong thing. No, your power is just your ability to actually take action and do where you want. And then the last level, and this is what I call like the evolved human that is really, really important, is when you take responsibility for what happens and you take full responsibility. Um, there's not many people like that. I call it very evolved. People, maybe 5% of the population gets there. Um, I get there sometimes and then I jump back and then I catch myself doing it. But usually people go between the blaming circumstances, blaming people, and they never actually make it to that last part. There is one exception to this rule, and that will be the people that take radical responsibility for everything. They're like, oh, just my fault. Like even shit that might be out of their control, like a natural disaster or something bad happens. But for the most part, taking responsibility of what happened is a big key in your growth. And there's a lot of shitty things that happen to people and a lot of bad things that happen. A lot of times, I think about this idea is like a lot of times it's not your fault that maybe something happened to you. Maybe you had shitty parents. Maybe you got in a car accident. Maybe you made a bad financial decision. And maybe just something happened that was totally out of your control. Like the government shut down your business for a while. It's like out of your control. And that's not your fault. It's not your fault. But what is your responsibility is actually doing something about it and taking action, and don't sit back and be like, well, I could have been this, but this happened. It's like, okay, there's a lot of bad shit that happens to a lot of people and they've taken action and they've got out of it. So a lot of times people will just get stuck on something that happened in the past and they never actually go forward and get where they need to be. And then they wake up and they're old and they don't have any money. They're depressed and they're pissed off at the world, realizing that they just had this blame bias going all along. That's all I wanted to rant about this week. Just recognize it. Recognize when it's happening. Recognize when it's happening in your clients. And people have to take responsibility. You have to take responsibility for where you are in life, because at the end of the day, personal responsibility is the only way that you're going to get out of trouble and get yourself in a good place. That's my message for the week. Thanks for letting me rant a little bit, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.